And I would ask Mick Rice to start the proceedings. You have 2 minutes to say why people should vote for you, and I will indicate when you have 15 seconds left.
Thank you. I have a great deal of sympathy with those people who voted yes in the referendum in 2014. And I say that because many of them thought that at one bound Scotland could be free from Tory rule. But unfortunately, that did not happen. And we now need to look to the future and how we are going to work together successfully as a United Kingdom. Because it seems to me that the SNP are looking for an excuse for a second referendum, and the only justification for that will be if the UK fails. You know the slogan, Stronger for Scotland. I want to see a vibrant UK in which Scotland is strong. I think, unfortunately, that there is a subtext to the slogan, Stronger for Scotland, and I think it had an impact in the other countries of the UK in the general election last year, because when it became obvious that the SNP was going to do so well, I think resentment kicked in because they thought the SNP was going to be wagging the Labour dog. And the subtext of Stronger for Scotland is more for Scotland. And if it's more for Scotland, some other countries in the UK are going to have to pay for that. I think we should be working in harmony with our colleagues in the rest of the UK.
15 seconds.
Yes. Let me just say, I only discovered that I was English when I moved to Scotland. I thought I was a bog-standard Brit until I came here. Maybe if we got time, I'll tell you more about it in due course.
Time's up.
Thank you.
Could I remind you, Mick, you're on a microphone. Number 2 to speak is Michael Russell.
Thank you very much, Dan. I discovered I was English when I was born in Bromley in Kent in 1953. But I'm the SNP candidate. I've been the MSP for Argyll and Bute over the last 5 years, and of course I live just across the water there in Glendalough. The MSP does 3 jobs. The first job is to work with individuals, to help them to solve problems, to help them when they have difficulties. And I've held surgeries here and right across Argyll and Bute. I've worked with innumerable people, some of whom are in this room. The second job is to stand up for individuals and communities when they have difficulties and when they need their point of view put forward. And again, it's something I've done the lengths and breadth of Argyll and Bute, and particularly here with CalMac, with the council, with the health board, with the Scottish Government, with First Milk, with a whole range of organisations, companies and individuals. And the third job is to make laws, to go to the Scottish Parliament and to make laws, to make sure that we have good laws and to make sure that those laws are the laws that work for the people of Argyll and Bute, of the whole area. And again, I've done that, particularly most recently, in the work I've done on the Land Reform Bill, where I've been a member of the Scottish Parliament's Rural Affairs Committee. But there's a final thing that politicians have to do. They have to have a vision. They have to have a vision of the future. They have to have an idea of how they want things to change. And this election is about that. It's about making sure that Scotland continues to change for the better, that we have an equal, fairer, more just Scotland. We have a Scotland in which we are proud, a Scotland in which our education and health services are continually getting better, a Scotland in which we feel that we have the country that is the country we want to live in. And this is what the election is about. That's why we have so many people in the SNP out working in this election.
15 seconds.
About having that better Scotland, that better Argyll and Bute. I've been doing the job. I want to go on doing the job. I hope you'll support me to go on doing the job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number 3 speaker is Alan Reid.
Thank you, Dan, and I'd also like to start by thanking the Buteman for organising tonight's hustings. I was a Member of Parliament for Argyll and Bute for 14 years before losing last year in unusual circumstances. That is, my vote actually went up, but I lost because the SNP vote was able to leapfrog me because there was a collapse in the votes for the other parties. I agree with Mike's analysis of the job, so I won't repeat that. But I do have experience of representing Argyll and Bute and held surgeries the length and breadth of Argyll and Bute at least once in every small community, at least once a year. I want to put my parliamentary experience to good use on behalf of the people of Argyll and Bute. I want to see the next Scottish Parliament concentrate on growing our economy and delivering efficient and effective public services for the people of Scotland. We don't want to be distracted by another independence referendum. We had one, it was a clear result. We don't want to end up bogged down in a never-endum. We want to concentrate on delivering for the people of Scotland. Bute has tremendous potential, and I want to work with local people to realise that potential. I'm pleased that people in Bute, working with Highlands and Islands Enterprise and the Council, formed the Alliance for Action that aims, in its own words, to build a better Bute. I went to one of the meetings and was impressed by the number of local people there and their ideas, their skills, their enthusiasm. That partnership approach to regeneration is the correct one, and as a local MSP, I want to work with you to regenerate Rothesay Town Centre and the wider economy.
15 seconds.
I want to put the referendum behind us, work together to build a liberal, prosperous Scotland, and as your member of the Scottish Parliament, I would focus like a laser on running an effective government, growing our economy and delivering for all parts of Argyll and Bute.
Thank you. Speaker number 4 is Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for getting my name right. I've been introduced as David Cameron and Donald Trump. I'd just like to say what my vision is, which is really gained from what people have said to me out on my doorsteps. The issues that they're facing, like so much of the constituency, they matter here. Problems with infrastructure, problems with transport links, affordable housing, problems with telecommunications, internet, 4G, mobile coverage, everyday services, health, education, farming, cropping, the difficulties that farmers face coming from a farming background. We know how farmers and croppers face issues of volatile prices, especially the dairy farmers down here in Bute. And these are the issues that I've been talking to people about. And my vision for Argyll and Bute is one where we encourage repopulation in the face of predicted population decline. We keep our young people here. We provide jobs, we provide investment, and we manage to make our economy thrive. On a national level, my party leader, Ruth Davidson, launched our manifesto today. We represent the true unionist party. We are 100% committed to the union. If you voted no in September 2014, we will stand up for you. It's in our DNA, it's in our name. And we will seek to put the referendum to bed forever. The last thing Scotland needs is another referendum. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the Buteman. Thank you for attending. I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you for that. With your permission, ladies and gentlemen, could the candidates remain seated? You've had a look at them all as they stood up and addressed you. I think it would be better for discussion if they remain seated. And could I ask, please, for the first question?
As a father of a young...
Mike, coming to you.
As a father of a young son and expecting my second child on Saturday, I wanted to ask candidates about their views on healthcare provision, particularly in Rothesay. Over the last few years, I believe that the consultant for gynecology has been withdrawn and the access to routine scans has also been withdrawn. That requires a 6-hour round trip to Inverclyde Hospital now. And my partner, 38 weeks pregnant, had to make that trip. And with a lot of goodwill for the people who are looking for dialysis on the island, I agree it's a difficult thing, but for young families, those services are not available on the island, which are desperately needed to encourage young families to stay here. Without them, it is easier to be on the mainland. Thank you.
Thank you. So, in essence, you're asking for better healthcare provision on the island, particularly for young families. Mick Rice, would you like to start it off, please?
Yes, I mean, clearly my view is that there ought to be improved outreach arrangements so that rather than you travelling to IRH for services, that actually professionals travel from IRH and actually provide services here. Now, because of the size of the population, I don't think you can expect 24/7 arrangements, but one of the things that did concern me just walking past the hospital on the way here tonight, there clearly doesn't appear to be any A&E provision, or if there is, it's very small. And therefore, my view is that we ought to be able to have clinics based on the island through outreach work from the major hospitals. The other point that I would make is that often you cannot have the backup and the equipment located in a small hospital to deal with everybody's conditions. It's not possible to do that. And in a sense, it is true that if you were to collapse with some heart or coronary problem, it is probably better, particularly if it's a stroke, it's probably better to get into a major regional centre as fast as possible to be dealt with, rather than expecting a locum in a small area to deal with those sorts of issues. So I think there is a balance to be struck. What we need to try and do is ensure that where possible, services are located or provided on an outreach basis in Rothesay, and that we have an effective way of transferring acute cases quickly to regional centres. That, I think, would be an improvement.
Well, if I could just pay a compliment to the A&E, who have an excellent A&E department in the local cottage hospital here, who do a very good job for the local community. Beyond reproach. Donald Cameron, would you like to
Yeah, no, I'm very sympathetic.
follow?
I'm the father of 3 young children. I know how stressful it is anyway, scanning, for scans is. It's actually a common problem across the Highlands and Islands, which is clearly the region we fall in. And my hometown, Fort William, they stopped scanning, and that means that if you live on the Isle of Merkin Peninsula, you go all the way to Redmore and Inverness and back. And likewise on Isla, I was made aware of someone who, this really, it was someone who had a routine hospital appointment, but because of the travel involved, it ended up in taking 3 days off work to get there and back. So it's a common problem, and I think we need to spend the money. We need to invest in local NHS services, and how that is done. The precise nature of that, I'm not an expert, but I'm sure it is achievable. So that hopefully we can really increase spending and achieve that for you.
Mike Russell, please.
It's a constant problem across Argyll and Bute, the whole constituency, balancing two things. One is having services, as many services as possible, available locally, but also making sure that services are of the highest standard. And of course, the less often those services are required, I mean, there are lots of kids being born, but the less often those services are required, the more difficult it is to provide them locally. For 2 reasons. One is the frequency of use, therefore the cost of provision, but also what they call skills atrophy. Whatever you get, you want the best service. And you've got to get that from the people that are doing the job most often. That's one of the reasons why scans have moved. That in actual fact, the possibility of having a really high quality service of scanning in each locality is very difficult to do. And the question is, how do you balance it? And the answer is you invest in a very good general practice, which is ambitious and grows outwards and does lots of things. And the real example of that in Argyll and Bute is in Loch Gilphead. I mean, I'm a great fan of what happens in Loch Gilphead, because you have a very, very strong GP service in a small modern hospital, which has been replaced, and which then the team want to do as much as possible. For example, they do some comparatively simple but very important cancer treatments for the Beatson are done in that hospital, rather than people go from Loch Gilphead all the way there. So that's what we need to aim to provide. And that means that the community and the GPs have to want to see that in the community. Now, you're never going to have everything. Dialysis is an example where the number of people is crucial. And if you have enough people, it can be done. In Campbellton, they've raised money and got it there. In Oban, they still have a difficulty in providing it, and people go to Fort William and down to the Vale of Leven and down to Glasgow. So I would like to continue to encourage very, very good GP services, to encourage more GPs to come in, and it's difficult to recruit GPs, to make sure that they're ambitious to have more services in the community, because their pressure, backed by the pressure of the community and the community council, very strong community council health groups emerging now. We're on Mull tomorrow night for another Hustings. Health will be a big issue there. There's a very strong health group in the community council. If we can put those things in place, with the backing of your MSP, I think you can get a growth in services provided locally. And that's what I'd like to see. It will never be possible to provide everything. That's why you also need to have very good services to get people out of a place very quickly. And actually, although I have criticisms of part of the ambulance service, particularly patient transport, when the Medivac takes place, it takes place very quickly and very well. There are people in this room who've been on the hospital, including one of your councillors, not so long ago, and it works exceptionally well.
Thank you. Before going to Alan Reid, is there anyone from the audience who would like to comment on what you've heard already? The questioner, yeah.
Could I just add that we primarily planned.
The microphone.
I understand completely about. Can I just say about the planned thing? Because I understand emergencies must helivac, all the rest. But it's these planned scans. You know when they are, you know when they're going to happen. Previously, a consultant came over to the island and did these scans. There's nothing about skills atrophy, none of that. It's simply a case of cost cutting. Now, I know the SNP have tried to increase health spending, but my point is, it's not sufficient.
Chair, could I just add something to that? I don't think I need the microphone. Just to say that regarding the scans...
It's being recorded, so we need the microphone.
It's just to say regarding the scans, many routine scans used to be performed by the Victoria Hospital, but the scans that are available now are much more intensive and they give you much more information, but they're only housed in much more specialist units. You cannot bring that type of equipment to the patient or mother-to-be, and the mother-to-be has to go there to receive it because it's much more complex than the scans that used to be done.
Thank you. Alan Reid, please.
Yes, it's about getting the balance right between the serious conditions which are best dealt with in a centre of excellence in a big city hospital, and those procedures which can be safely carried out in a local hospital. Clearly, we want to have as many procedures as can be safely carried out in local hospitals, carried out in the local hospitals. In regard to the two issues that have been mentioned, the dialysis, there is the pilot going on in Campbellton to see if with modern equipment those scans can be safely done in a small hospital. And that pilot, I understand, is due to be evaluated later this year, and hopefully will be successful, and then that can then be rolled out to the other hospitals like here at Rothesay. With regard to the maternity scans, yes, I think as Isabel had pointed out there, the modern scans are much more complicated than it was before. But I do remember that when I was the Member of Parliament, the Health Board were working on a procedure that would allow them to carry out these scans in local hospitals. And they were promising that, assuming that project could be properly evaluated then, it would be rolled out to local hospitals. The evaluation was that it could be done safely. I've obviously over the past year, I have I've lost touch with some of these issues, but certainly if you elected me as your MSP, one of the first jobs I would do would be get onto the health board and start asking the questions about why a maternity scan has not been carried out in local hospitals like here in Rothesay, and I would be wanting the answers from them. Either yes, we will carry it out in Rothesay, or there is a good safety reason why we can't.
Thank you. Anyone from the audience like to comment on what you've heard so far? Okay, we'll move on then to the next question, please.
Chair Pitt, thank you. I actually have two questions, Mr. Chair. Is it okay to ask them together?
Are they related?
Slightly. Sound like a politician.
Just ask one at a time if you don't mind, please. Your first question.
Because they both have the same background. Okay. With each of the candidates, without putting forward their own party line, please tell me what proposals, now I'd actually written this down a while ago, without mentioning your own, what is the best proposals for running the NHS in Scotland? And that's where I'm going back. This is because of all the publicity that is obtained by every single party and without you being able to do anything. So whatever you think about your own party, would the other parties, or the other parties already have said what they're going to do? So without mentioning your party, could you tell me which party you think would be the best for NHS in Scotland?
I don't think they're going to tell you what the other ones think. Quite sure they won't. But what you're really asking is, how would the candidates on this platform run the NHS? Is that the basis of your question? Okay. I'll go to Mike Russell first this time.
Well, if I'm not allowed to mention the SNP, I shall be a little bit constrained in what I can actually say, because I think the proposals in the SNP are the best ones. But I think there are priorities that emerge with each different election in terms of health spending and health activity. And it often comes from areas that have not been invested in enough in previously. And I think there's a number beginning to show themselves in this election. One is mental health services, particularly in Argyll and Bute. There has been considerable underinvestment in mental health in Argyll and Bute, and there needs to be renewed investment in mental health. And I'm glad to say that a party known to me is likely to invest substantial additional sums in mental health. The second one is GP provision, and I've mentioned GP provision before. I mean, right across Argyll and Bute, I see problems that have emerged because of the difficulties of recruiting and retaining GPs. So we need to have greater investment in getting GPs into rural Scotland and holding them there and making sure they want to be there, and then they can build the services that are needed in those areas. And I want to see more of that happening. I was on Lismore last week talking to the GP from Appin, who was over on Lismore, and there is a real desire to make sure there's greater investment in GP services. Now, there's a range of other things. Somebody has pointed out that health spending continues to increase. It does, and there's a commitment to continue to increase it in the next Parliament so that health is the number one priority. But I think within that, there are things that need to change. And in this area, two things in particular: GP services, mental health services. And if I were allowed a third one, it would be to make sure that patient transport and ambulance services is improved, because some of the largest complaints I have about health service are about ambulance and particularly about patient transport services, which are very problematic.
Alan Reid, please.
Well, I agree with Mike. I mean, I think Mike summed it up very well. I mean, I had written, before you even started speaking, I'd written, the question was asked the question, I'd written down mental health and GPs, and these are the two big issues that I think the next Scottish Government has to look at. There will, I believe, no matter which party is in power, I believe there will be more money put into the National Health Service. It's certainly our party's proposals. And I think the two areas where we need to concentrate on are, first of all, mental health, which has been allowed to lag behind physical health in terms of the amount of money spent on it, and treating mental health should be put on an equal footing to treating physical health. We do have a looming crisis in rural GP services. There are already substantial numbers of GP vacancies. Buteman recently reported that there were 4 short at the local practice here, of which it reported that there had been 2 identified, but that still leaves 2 vacancies where nobody has been identified, and that is the similar picture throughout rural Scotland. And the unfortunate thing is that if we don't take urgent action, it could get a lot worse, because a large proportion of our GPs are nearing retiring age, and there's simply not enough GP training places in Scotland to replace them. So there has to be a big investment in GP training, and also making rural practice more attractive to GPs. So those were the 2 big issues I could see, are mental health and rural GPs.
Mick Rice, please.
You can't keep cutting the NHS and expect it to perform better. And one of the things that we need to take on board, and you can Google it, you don't need to take my word for it, the Scottish Government have reduced expenditure on the NHS to a higher percentage than the Conservative government have done in England. So that's the truth of the matter.
No.
And what you have got in terms of reorganisation, you've got the development currently of community health partnerships, something which I support, but where the councils who are coming in and running community health partnerships are now snaffling up whatever NHS money they can lay their hands on because they haven't got enough money to provide the social care packages. We all know that there are people in hospitals, elderly people in the main, who can't get social care packages and they're bed blocking. And it's costing the NHS to keep them in hospital because the councils can't afford the social care packages. So that's what I think we need to do. We need to say, in Scotland, we're going to end austerity and we're going to use our tax-raising powers to ensure that the NHS gets properly funded. And there is only, as far as I'm aware, would you believe, one party which shall be nameless that has that as part of its programme.
What do you think of what you've heard so far?
What I've heard so far is no answer to the question. I asked each one to name which party would be the best, without naming their own party, which party would be the best.
The second best, it has to be,
or run the NHS in Scotland. None of them mentioned which party they think might do that. And I know it's against their way of working, but that was the question I asked, and that's the question that I answered.
Well, as I said when you asked the question, I doubt if you would get an answer to that. Mike was muttering when Mick was speaking. I would like to give him an opportunity to come back.
The main point is in terms of cutting health expenditure. The Scottish Government has continued to increase health expenditure, actually above the rate of inflation, and indeed over and above the amounts of money that have been coming in the Barnett formula. So I'm afraid Mick is simply plain wrong in terms of expenditure on health.
I don't think so. You can Google it.
Anyone from the audience like to comment? You've already asked the question. I'll come back if there's no one else. Anyone else in the audience? I thought this would have been really a hot potato of a subject, the NHS.
As someone who's experienced the suicide of my brother in the last few years, I've heard a lot about making mental health the same as physical health, but what does that really mean? Does that mean financially? Does that mean waiting lists? Does that mean treatments available? What does it mean? Because at the present time, mental health in funding, in aspirations, in actual treatments is far behind any of the other services the NHS provides. What do the candidates propose to do?
Donald?
Well, I think it's as simple as more money needs to be spent on it. It's not, it's a very, very serious topic and it requires greater investment. In relation to the question, I can't answer you either because I'm not going to recommend one of my opponents, unsurprisingly. We announced today that we will want the NHS budget in Scotland to rise by 2% or by the rate of inflation or by the equivalent Barnett consequential, whichever is higher, because we believe we need greater investment in the NHS. And the statistic I have is that in England, the increase in spending in the last 5 years was 6.8%, whereas the increase in spending in Scotland has only been 1%. So it would be my position that more money is spent in England than in Scotland, and frankly, we need to change that.
Yeah, it's true.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience? We'll move on to the next question then. Lady over here, Bert.
I'd like to ask a question about business development, economic development, and how that is going to be achieved, but specifically, because we're here on Bute, relating that to two very important pieces of legislation, one being the Community Empowerment Bill, which is under consultation just now, and the other one being the Land Reform Bill. I'm involved in both the Alliance for Action Charette and also a project called The Vital Spark, which is about supporting more social entrepreneurs to happen. I'm supporting 4 who've already started the journey, and there's another 5 about to start the journey. And there's issues for both private enterprise and social enterprise in being able to expand on this island because of property, both in terms of buildings and land. And I'd like to know what's going to happen, or what you see is going to happen in the next Parliament that's going to help change that situation for business development on this island.
So the basis of your question is you want to encourage business development, entrepreneurial skills. Donald, would you like to lead with this one, please?
I mean, I think the answer is there are so many factors at play, and you need a comprehensive, multi-factorial answer, really. We need to look at business rates, local business rates. We were in Open a fortnight or so ago where this issue came up. We need a radical review of business rates so that we encourage small business, small enterprise. Again, issues of infrastructure, communications, critical in an island like Bute. And we need a competitive economy. And one of the things that my party believe, this comes down to income tax, is that people shouldn't pay greater tax in Scotland than they do in the rest of the UK. And we advocate everyone in the UK paying the same, keeping our tax rates in line with the UK rates. So in terms of land reform, I think there is obviously now an enhanced community right to buy, and there are issues of in terms of if it can be shown that sustainable development is to be promoted, then there are now powers, albeit not powers that my party welcomed when the bill was going through, but the fact is the bill has been passed. And one of the things that is very dear to me is seeing local, remote, rural communities thrive so that we provide jobs, keep our young people here, and we provide them security so that they stay here.
Thank you. Mick Rice, please.
Yeah, one of the things that really upsets me is the way that the internet shopping has grown and impacted upon the high street, particularly in rural towns and villages, because quite often those that are controlling internet shopping tend to be large multinational corporations that don't pay their taxes because they take advantage of double Irish Dutch sandwiches and other fancy financial arrangements. And that seems to me that it's got to stop, because over the last 20 or 30 years we have a situation where the filthy rich have become super dirty filthy rich, and we need to do something to address that. That's one thing. I think that in terms of Bute, where I am told that you have got super fast broadband in here, because they tell me in Dunoon that it's coming from Bute, so you must have it already, that they ought to be using that to make something of it. And I would expect, therefore, that the Scottish Government, which is going to have new powers, and therefore new powers means new civil servants, why can't they locate them here if we've got the connectivity to do that? We ought to be looking at ways of, rather than putting these civil servants in the big cities and towns, devolving them to smaller locations, like Rothesay, like Dunoon. I also think that there is an issue in relationship to transport. I live just north of Dunoon in the pretty little village of Blairmore, and I help run a B&B there. If I want to come out for a night to Rothesay, I can't do it. And I was actually talking before the meeting started, got a bit of local knowledge. Apparently many years ago, there used to be a ferry service from Port Bannatyne across the way to Ardine Point. Now that would mean I could come and visit the restaurants in Rothesay of an evening, and indeed you could return the compliment and maybe come to Dunoon on occasions, because I tell you what, that needs it as well. So it does seem to me that transport infrastructure does need to be improved, and I'd want to bottom that out, because the other thing which did concern me quite considerably in terms of getting people here and getting them comfortable here. I was coming back from Glasgow Central on a train, chatted to a guy, bad weather, the ferry's off, he couldn't get back to Rothesay. So I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, I'm going to try and get to the Western, and then I'm going to try and thumb a lift round to Collintribe so I can get there before 9 o'clock to get the boat over to Rubodic. And then I'll have to get someone to come and pick me up. Now, if you imagine people go up to Glasgow for a training day or whatever it is they have to do, or even if they go to the hospital or something, how are they going to get back if you've got adverse weather? You're going to have to depend on getting across on the Western. We need to get better transport links. Without transport links, we can't have a thriving economy. It just won't work.
Would you like to comment on what you've heard so far?
I think I'd quite like an answer to my question, which was about how business on this island can develop, and particularly the issues around access to property to grow their businesses, access to land to expand their businesses, and business space for new start-ups. And whilst the two answers were very interesting, I don't know that they quite focused. Maybe I didn't phrase my question very well, Dan.
Well, I understood it. I don't have the research resources that David Dimbleby enjoys at the BBC, but I'm sure Mike Russell will help me out here. But is the land reform bill that's currently being discussed, is that not part of what you're asking?
Yes, and the bill before that, the Community Empowerment Bill, was a bill that gave further powers. The answer is the opportunities are great, but the biggest player in this will have to be the council, because the council owns substantial resources and assets which the Community Empowerment Bill could allow to be transferred to either businesses or communities for the benefit of the community. Now, there's a case presently in Rothesay, it's been in the Buteman, so it must be true, in terms of the brewery, where you have a resource that's owned by the council, and it's actually not been used for a very long time. The name Old Slaughterhouse gives it away. It is sitting there, and it could become a place for the expansion of a business. But I'm sitting here, and I think if I was sort of to go around a wee bit, I could see Castle Toward. And there is one of the real issues of how a local community was stymied by the council itself in terms of transfer of an asset. Where there was a business plan that worked, there was money available to the community, and it was constantly refused, and that building is still not sold. That building actually is still costing you and I, as people who pay for the cost of the council, over £2,000 a month, right, in order just to keep it wind and watertight. So our Butte Council has to change substantially and want to see communities and others take control of assets. Now, the Community Empowerment Bill has a clause on abandoned and neglected land. So it gives communities the powers to say, we want that, and we want to put that to work. So that's the Community Empowerment Bill. The Land Reform Bill has other powers, including community purchase of assets, which is something that the community could consider doing. They have to be geographic communities. I think that's a weakness in the bill. But there's a third issue, which is to carry on with the process of land reform, to say that these are important powers. I think that there are many places in Bute that could use them. For example, there's places that we need to make sure that tenant farmers have the right to buy farms. And that is an issue which the Land Reform Bill did not fully bottom out. There are better things in terms of assignation in it, but I moved an amendment to the bill on the right to buy. I didn't push it because it was obviously not going to go through, but I gave notice. I was going to take it on for the next stage in the next Parliament to say that there needs to be, if you had a tenancy for 50 years or more, and that was the qualification in my amendment, then you should be able to purchase that land. I know of people in this constituency whose tenancies have lasted for almost 200 years. And yet they don't have the right to purchase that land, and their landlords actually are extremely poor in terms of maintaining buildings and other things on them. So communities can benefit from those two bills. There's many ways to do so. I'm itching, I have to say, for somebody in this community to use the abandoned and neglected land clause. It's not been used yet. There are 2 or 3 places in this community I could see it working. If anybody here wants to find a way to use it, I'd be your person to support that. In terms of the Land Reform Bill, there are issues in agriculture and other tenancies and in community empowerment, and there is more to be done. So the opportunities are great. Final thing, if I might, The other thing that the council and the government have to do is to support and sustain existing businesses. So there are good businesses on Bute, see down at the back, there's Boatyard, there's a range of businesses in Bute that need to be sustained, and tourism needs to be invested in. Tourism is not a poor relation. Tourism is in actual fact a good business for the island, and there needs to be more investment in it.
Alan Reid, please.
Well, there clearly is a problem with either existing businesses who want to expand, acquiring the buildings and the land needed to do that, and also people who have ideas to start up a business being able to get the property required. I mean, if I was elected as your MSP, I mean, one of the first things I'd want to do would be work with Highlands and Islands Enterprise and the council to see what was available, what could be made available, and if it's needed for local business and the building's lying empty and it's owned by the council, I see absolutely no reason why that should not be sold or leased to the business. So if acquiring land was a problem, then again we should be using the powers that are in the legislation that's been put through the Scottish Parliament for the community to acquire that land. That we shouldn't be allowing, lack of land to be a barren development here in the Highlands and Islands, because we have plenty of land, and it certainly should. So lack of land should never be a problem. If there has to be the legislation that's been passed, if it has to be used for compulsory purchase in some way, then yes, it should be used. But I think it's a case of whoever's elected as a member of the Scottish Parliament sitting down with Highlands and Islands Enterprise, the council, and identifying what's available, what people need to expand their business, and then making sure that it does become available.
Any comment from MD in the audience? Mr. McFarlane.
It's Alistair McFarlane. The gentleman then made a remark about super fast broadband. We've got a fibre optic cable passing our door, but we don't have broadband. Within 10 yards of my front door, the cable passes, yet we don't have broadband. They told us the exchange needs brought up to date when we wanted to do it. The whole area of Kilcatton Bay is playing about trying to get internet connection. We get it sometimes, but it's very, very slow. So on that one question, one answer you gave us. Also, you made a comment on the transport to the island. You forgot one issue. What about a bridge? It would solve an awful lot of problems this place and generate a lot more business to this island, because the boats are just a nightmare. On Monday they were off for a gentle breeze out the east, and they were off. There's no reason for it. In the old days the boats sailed any day, any weather, any time. It's really, these new boats have been a dead loss to the island. Thank you.
That was a comment rather than a question. If we could just go along the table very, very briefly, the question about broadband. How do we solve that on this island? We'll just go down the table very briefly.
Yeah, there are other ways of getting broadband besides fibre optic cable. I mean, I'm told that you can get it through satellite provision. There are, well, that's what I'm told. So there may be other technologies at play, but it does seem to me to be absolutely ridiculous if you've got a superfast broadband running outside your property. Now, I don't know how far it is from where it's running to your property itself. Is it miles up a road or something? Well, I mean, clearly the exchange does need to be brought up to date, and you know, I think something does need to be done about it. And I would personally take it up with whoever is elected as the next MSP, even if it isn't me. Okay?
Okay. Alan, briefly, what would you do about broadband?
Well, we have to deliver super fast broadband everywhere over the time span of the next Parliament. There are different solutions. There's satellite, there's wireless, there's the fibre optic cable. If elected, I would want to speak to Highlands and Islands Enterprise, who are charged with delivering the superfast broadband. I would want to speak to them to say what is the problem at Kilcatton Bay. If it's the exchange that needs upgraded, then the exchange will have to be upgraded. If a wireless solution is better, then we provide a wireless solution. But these are technically available. We have to decide which is the best one for each community, but it's absolutely essential that superfast broadband is delivered to every home and business premises within the lifetime of the Scottish Parliament.
Thank you. Michael.
There's a 100% commitment in the next Parliament, and that will have to be met. I spend a very considerable amount of my time and my office's time fighting with BT. The best solution will be to continue to kick BT as hard as possible to deliver what it's promised to deliver, but there are whole areas here, and I live in one of them, which is not getting the service that they need to get. Very slow broadband indeed, and no plans to upgrade it. It will be 100% in the next Parliament, and I expect over the next 5 years, if I'm re-elected, to continue to push very hard to make sure that that is delivered, because it has to be delivered. It's an essential. It's not an option. It's an essential, and it has to be delivered. And it is, in some places, it is now delivered. This has been a huge project, 25 undersea cables laid in the last 2 years, but BT has been, if I may use the words politely, a disappointment in how it has been delivering, and it will need to do a lot better over the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. Donald.
Thanks. I mean, more investment is needed. I was talking to someone up in Connell the other day who said actually he's got a problem just with his landline, let alone broadband. Poor landline quality is still an issue. I think we need more funding for community broadband Scotland. The UK government has said they introduced something called a universal service obligation, which is that every household will have a legal right to broadband by 2020. So I obviously support that. And the last thing I say is that there are other solutions. As Mick said, there are small community-led initiatives whereby satellites can be used and signals can be bounced around, and mostly it's up in my part of the world. So there are other options should fibre optic not work or take too long.
I'll come back to you just a minute. Was your comment about broadband?
Yeah.
There's a microphone.
It was just to say that we have been part of an experiment for the last 3 or 4 years in the south end of the island, and we have got a dish on the side of our house, and it's beamed into the exchange and fired into the house, and it's not really been successful. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Can I ask why not? Is it the
Weather?
speed of the internet, or is it just unreliable?
It's unreliable. When it is working, it's great, but it's very unreliable.
That's it, thank you. Are you happier now with the answers you've had about improving business on the island? Sorry? Slightly. Well, whoever gets voted in as your MSP, you can get to them as soon as the elections are over. Could we have another question, please? Gentleman at the front here, Bert.
Due to the appalling service that the Bute people received from CalMac, I would like to ask each candidate what they intend doing regarding the terrible problem on the Rest and Be Thankful at Glen Crow. That is my question. That has been going on for year after year now with no permanent solution. A similar problem or a similar scenario arose in Sweden 2 years ago. A viaduct was built in 2 months, end of problem. And in my opinion, as someone who has driven on the Rest and Be Thankful for 60 years, a viaduct is absolutely essential. That's my question, but before I close, can I just say that if the Bute people think CalMac is a disgrace, they should live in Mull, where it's even worse. It was so bad that residents in Mull were using fishing boats to take them to the mainland.
Right. I'm just ever so slightly confused when you talk about CalMac and then go on to talk about the Rest and Be Thankful.
I said that due to the service offered by CalMac, it is essential the A83 is permanently open. That is an alternative and necessary artery to the mainland for the people of Bute.
So really, if I can rephrase your question, forgetting about the ferries for a minute, you want an improvement on the A82, a solution, an improvement at Glen Crow.
Yes. Alan Reid has been very vociferous, as has Mr Cameron, in the press recently regarding the Rest and Be Thankful.
Right, okay. Could I have Alan Reid then to respond first to that one?
Right. It's a vitally important road link, not just, as you said, for Bute, but for the whole of Argyll, and I would consider that fixing it, putting a permanent solution in place to be a top priority. And if I was elected as your MSP, I would be on the phone to the Transport Minister on the first day that he or she is appointed. There was a Jacobs report compiled a few years ago which put forward 4 alternatives which are affordable. One was to put a canopy above the road, one was the one that you suggested, to put the road on a viaduct, one was to upgrade the old military road to trunk road status, one was to put a trunk road on the other side of the glen. My own personal favourite would be a trunk road on the other side of the glen. That would mean that there would be, and keep both the existing road and the new road open, operating as effectively as a dual carriageway under normal circumstances, but if a landslide closed one or the other, then the other one is open up to trunk road status. That's my own personal preference. The engineers in Transport Scotland, once they do the analysis, may have a different preference, but 4 alternatives will be put forward. It has to be a top priority, taking that forward, getting the money into the capital programme and making sure that it happens. And certainly I give the commitment that if I was the MSP, I would be phoning the Transport Minister the first day that they're appointed and saying this has to be a priority, the money has to go into the capital programme, this has to happen.
Question, why did you not do that when you were an MP?
Because that's a matter that's devolved to the Scottish Parliament.
Well, the answer to that is independence, then we'll get the things done.
Oh, well, yeah. But you've got the powers already.
The Scottish Parliament already has the powers to do that, and I suppose it's Mike that's really to answer your question.
Through the chair, if you don't mind. Mick Rice, please.
I am told that, because we've had this question before, actually we were asked this when we were up in Oban, so I've picked up some information from some of the other candidates. I don't want to steal all of their thunder, no doubt, but there we are. The point is, I'm told, that the Rest and Be Thankful is not closed as often as it used to be, and that one of the major problems is that the weather is getting worse. But I think for people on Bute, the likelihood is that when the Rest and Be Thankful is closed because of landslip, it's because of adverse weather, and the likelihood is that you won't have a ferry service either. So what the people from Bute have to do to try and get back home at night if they're working in the Central Belt seems to me it's impossible, because on Dunoon when the ferries are off, it's a huge detour. If you can't get across the Rest and Be Thankful, it's even further round Crean Larrick and through Inverary. So it does seem to me that there is a major issue that does need to be solved over the Rest and Be Thankful. And what I would like to see is a start date for the work for the new road on the other side of the Glen, because you can get, the new Forth Road Bridge on the other side of Scotland, and you can get the upgrading of the road to Inverness, but we can't seem to get this one resolved. We've had the engineer's report, we've had the recommendations. When is the start date going to be to sort it out?
I don't know if anyone around this table could answer that question. I really don't.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, could I ask the British Nationalist Labour, where is all the information from? Because really, you can get back to Isle of Bute quite easily. You can use Western ferries. And Western ferries are taken to Crawl and Drive, and they're on most of the time. Western ferries are always on. Calmac are invariably off. I mean, it's been off this week, and it's just, well, the new pier was set up in Wings Bay on the 1st of April, I think it was, or 28th of March. And it's been off nearly 12, 14 times. The ferry has been off. I'm not saying the pier's been closed for all that time, but there's been 14, a dozen sailings at least didn't take part from across from Wings Bay. Now, there's something far wrong when that happens. And Alison McFarlane made a point about a bridge. There has to be different thinking, and I would like to hear what you think of the matter, because there's a number of things that are wrong. One, the ferries are wrong, and I don't think they are. Two, the piers are wrong, and I do think they are. Three, they're not in the right place, and then you've got to start and work all the other things all round about that, and what other form of transport and where it's to go and come from. And I think there's an awful lot of work to be done in the background before they start mucking about with ferries and complaining about boats. There's a lot of work being done. I want to hear some thoughts from your brains instead of mine.
Whose brains are you referring to?
Maybe Circle sort it out if they get the contract. But I think the people at the table must be able to say something about it. There's a lot of money needing to be spent on the transport to this island. I agree with the gentleman down there, getting to Mull's not funny, but I understand the same situation as goes on in Isla. You've got a job trying to get book onto a boat and get across, and that's standard in Isla. Now I think there's a lot of work has got to go into the sorting out of the communications with Argyll and Bute, and at ferries, roads and air transport as well. I would like to hear what they've got to say on that.
Yeah, at the chance of getting lynched, I'm going to kind of defend the people at the table here, because everything that you've proposed costs money. Where is that money going to come from? People don't want to have their taxes raised, and I know it's a minefield when you go into talking about who's evading or avoiding, whatever the correct term is. But all these projects, the bridge, the new road and the A82, all cost money. Or the A83, thank you. You want to say something, Mike?
Well, I mean, I just wanted to agree with some of the things that are being said at the back in terms of different thinking. Because something that Mick Rice said is actually very true, which is the weather is getting worse, very substantially worse. And in fact, if you look at the records for the rest and be thankful, and the rainfall and the rest and be thankful, the rainfall is more intense. There is far more of it, 40% up in the last 30 years. And that is a problem. That road would not be built where it is now. So we have to get different solutions. Now, actually, I'm in favour of the bridge. I think that that's an important thing, and I live just on the other side of it, so I can come across my evening's entertainment that Mick was anticipating in Bute, and I look forward to it.
I might even join you.
I really look forward to my evening's entertainment in Bute. But we've got those problems to deal with. But also, let's deal in facts. There were 6 options in the Jacobs report, one of which is being implemented, the red option. And indeed, since I became MSP in 2011. We've managed to get the diversion route in place. It's not perfect, but there is a diversion route now in place. The red option is being implemented, very substantial expenditure, and the number of days of closure has diminished dramatically. 34 days in the first period up until 2012. Actually, there's only been 4 days in the last 2 years. But it's not good enough, but actually it is getting better. Now, I'm a member of the A83 task force. I've been going to the meetings, and my view is, and I think it's in view of the majority on the task force, that we should actually go for what is called the green option. That is the road on the other side. There's presently a forestry road on the other side. I actually favoured that as a diversion route, but both the Transport Scotland and Forest Enterprise Scotland were against it, because they're very concerned about the drop away at the end of it. The very end of it has a very severe drop away. I'm not in favour of the viaduct or the lid for very substantial reasons. The lid on the road would require, and Jacob's report says this, would require the road to be closed in order to put the lid on. If it's going to be closed, you'd have to build an alternative road anyway, so you're better actually to build it on the other side. I would like to see, and this is what I am arguing for, I'm arguing through the task force for it, and I think we're making progress, and I'll say that in a moment. I'd like to see the forestry road made into a proper full road. It also avoids the difficulty with the viaduct. There are 2 difficulties, one of which is environmental. If you can make that road up into a full road, then you have 2 roads. So essentially you have a dual carriageway. And you can operate it as a dual carriageway, which would be a substantial improvement. But if you have problems, particularly with the road on this side, then you have an alternative carriageway. But the red investment is going ahead. And it's not just the things you see. It's not just the culverts, the wider culverts. It's not just the netting. They're about to start tree planting on the hill. Now that's taken time because they've had to come to an agreement with the estate that owns the hill. But that tree planting, the red stuff, has diminished and will continue to diminish the problem. The problem will be resolved for continuous access if we can build the alternative route. Now, where that is at the moment is, I think the A83 task force has been very supportive of it, as a result of which there's pressure from the task force to get the government to do the planning work on it, and I hope that they can be persuaded to do that at the start of the next Parliament, and then it will have to go into the capital programme. But I'll continue to press for that because that's the permanent solution. The permanent solution is also based on continuous access, and that's the other change. 2 years ago, I got the Transport Minister to accept the principle of continuous access. But the final important thing in this, Dan, let me finish on this because it's very important, is that we have to actually say about this that no matter what happens, that road will continue to be open, and we will tell people that it will continue to be open. Because the worst thing, the thing that works against the interests, particularly of Mid-Argyll, is where people think it's not going to be open and therefore don't come. So we've got to be very positive and to say the work we've done has made a difference, as it has done, but there's more to do. And finally, let's think differently. 5 years ago, I started to talk about a fixed link to Dunoon. Actually, the best fixed link is a new bridge at Argentini, which is in the Jacobs report, actually, as one of the alternatives. And that's a possibility. Let's talk about how we would like to see the transport infrastructure here. At the end of the 19th century, there was a plan for a railway to go from Northern Ireland to Campbelltown. It actually was a serious plan, but it never happened. We should start thinking big again about the transport infrastructure. And if we start now, then we've got a possibility of getting real change over the next decade or so.
Thank you. Donald Cameron.
I think everyone accepts that a permanent solution is needed for the rest of the backbone, not a short-term fix, but a permanent solution. Now, the technicalities, I'm not an expert in the technicalities, but canopies are used in Europe, viaducts are used in Europe. It should be possible to find a long-term solution. It's a lifeline. We all know it's a lifeline. It's a lifeline to here, it's a lifeline to Dunoon, it's a lifeline to Gilphead, etc. And if the Scottish Government can afford to build a new fourth road bridge, if they can afford to dual the A9 from Perth to Inverness, then they can afford a permanent long-term solution for the rest of the country.
Are you happy with what you're hearing?
Reasonably.
Reasonable. That's progress.
It's going in the right direction.
Sorry?
It's going in the right direction.
Yeah. But is it, I'm not supposed to ask questions, but is the problem not as this gentleman here alluded to, the poor service that the island gets from Carmack? And why do we get a poor service from Carmack?
Boats are not good enough.
A minute.
I disagree with that. Those are perfect.
No, they're not.
Well, don't. Mr. McFarlane.
Just one question on Carmack. They've spent a fortune at Wimsby Pier. Now the lorries have got to go around an S-bend to get on it because they've got to alter the ramp approaching the boat. Now, where's the logic in this company? We've never thought of that. Arctic's milk lorry, Arctic's of Buteman, paid differently, leaving the boat. And if there's a wee waiver at all, they're going to be cash on the sides. I think it's a piece of nonsense. I'd like to know who's to blame for that.
Sorry?
I can tell you who's to blame for that.
It's not the Mike Russell show, but there we go.
I'm happy to give you that information. CMAL is to blame for that. And I think CMAL should be abolished. CMAL is a company that owns the piers and the assets, also owns the boats. It is a ridiculous interpolation of an unnecessary piece of bureaucracy in how you run ferry services. There are two problems. One is you don't have enough boats, and we have to build more boats. Unfortunately, they are building them now. But the second one is, in my view, CMAL is pointless, and they should get rid of it. And it's CMAL that commissioned the engineering work at Weems Bay. It's CMAL that was responsible for the first false attempt, if you remember. It was to be closed much earlier than it was ever closed. And the contract that they seemed to let didn't work, so they had to let it again. So I am strongly in favour of a major change to get rid of CMAL and to make sure that we don't have that unnecessary bit of nonsense, because they're the ones who designed it.
Thank you. Could you get a commitment from the panel that if you are elected to the Scottish Parliament, you would do something about Weems Bay in particular and the A83? Just a quick, would you?
Yeah, of course, but I think it ought to be explained that CMAL is a public company answerable to Scottish ministers, so it seems to me a bit incorrect of the previous MSP saying, well, it's CMAL's fault because they're answerable to Scottish ministers. And I know, or certainly there was press speculation, that when Callie Mack changed their chief executive a few years ago, it was shortly after Mike Russell had a private meeting with him. So maybe something could be done about CMAL if the Scottish Government and the MSP had taken some interest in the matter earlier on. But there we are.
What would you do, Alan?
Well, I've already answered on the A83. On the ferries, one of the first jobs I would want to do if I was elected as your MSP would be speak to Transport Scotland, which are the agency that's supposed to be responsible for good transport links throughout Scotland, and just start asking them questions. I mean, what is actually wrong with this ferry service? Is it the ferries? Is it the piers? Is it or something else? Get your experts onto this. Get your experts examining this. Tell me what's actually wrong and what you're going to do to put it right.
Well, Mr McFarlane's question was simply that the design at Weems Bay can't accommodate Arctic lorries. I mean,
well, if that's the case, then the design it will have to be altered.
Can I make one point to follow up to that? I brought up this question at Caledonian Brain meeting, the public school, where I suggested to them to put in a windbreak at Weems Bay, which should take away all the stress at the pier. And I don't know who the gentleman was that was speaking that night, assured me that he'd look into it, which nothing has been done about it, and that would solve an awful lot of problems at Weems Bay.
Definitely agree with that, yes.
okay. Right, quickly this time.
Commitment, well, yes to both of your questions. Fair enough, and I've been doing it already, and I'll go on doing it.
Donald?
Absolutely, you have that commitment. Without that.
Okay, can we move on? Is this in connection with the ferry?
To my mind, I mean, there are a lot of problems, but it seems to be the mindset within the company of CalMac. It seems to be health and safety that has just went absolutely bonkers. You know, you've got another ferry company which is sailing back and forward to Clyde all the time, but it just seems to be this mindset. And even the other day there I seen in the Buteman, we have now got 2 warning colours before they actually go off.
Oh, yes.
You know, what's that all about? I mean, they just don't want to sail unless it's flat calm, or if there's too much water on the Clyde, they won't sail in. You see, that's what you've got to do something about. I mean, this island is dying on its feet because of CalMac and because we have no link to the mainland. I mean, I would like to ask a question. We need a bridge. Do you agree? Simply to the 4 of you. Simple question. Thank you.
Okay. We'll go this way this time. Donald, would you support the idea of a bridge?
I would support the idea of a bridge, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes?
Well, I'd want to consult with the community first. I think the question I'd want to put back to you is, where do you see the bridge going from where to where? Where do you see it going?
Well, as far back as Rothesay Reid, who was a councillor years ago, he told me that the reason the road at Colin Drive wasn't finished by the last wee bit single track is that there was supposed to be a bridge built, and it was going to go through the fields there, just where it becomes single track. Where it becomes a single track, it was going to go up round the fields there and join on to the other side. That's the 1960s. That was.
What benefit do you think that would bring over the alternative of having the ferry service from Colin Drive to Rothesay running till say 1 o'clock in the morning? Because remember, if you have that ferry service is rarely off, and if the weather conditions are bad enough to put that ferry service off, they would probably close the bridge as well.
Right, well, from my own personal experience, I'm a dairy farmer in Ireland, and over the years we tried to get various milk companies to buy our milk. Now, they were quite willing to haul milk from all over Scotland, but they weren't willing to touch us here because it was a ferry. Right. It was an island. And you've got a £4 million, £5 million a year business that's right down the toilet just now. And one of the main reasons is that we didn't have a direct or a constant link with the mainland.
Okay, that's a good answer to my question. I'm glad I asked it. Well, my answer is I would want, I'm not going to give a commitment either way. I would want to consult with the community to find out what the views of the community were.
I was going to say yes as well to the bridge.
Sorry, yeah.
But I would like to check whether it's best at Colin Drive, Rothesay, or whether it's best at Port Bannatyne across to Ardine Point. So we need to check that out, and maybe that would be something I'd want some community feedback on.
Well, how long does it take you? I mean, you're an hour and 20 minutes from Rothesay to the centre of Glasgow. Getting round the other way, you're just driving into the middle of nowhere.
All right, okay. That's 58 and 3.
What's your views on what you've heard? You've had quite a long time on this one.
Yes, very good, Dan. Yes, they've all answered my question. I'd just like to ask Mr Russell, when he returns to Parliament, to tell the Transport Minister that Glen Crow is spelled C-R-O-E, not C-R-O-W.
We can't presume anything at a Hustings meeting. Could we move on, please, to another question? This gentleman here.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I would like to go in a completely different direction and ask something about more national policy, particularly energy policy and security of electricity supply in Scotland. We all know that Ballingarry Power Station was allowed to close recently. There was a report published by the Institution of Engineers and Shipbuilders in Scotland drawing attention to potential problems next winter in England when they will be short of electricity and unable to export to Scotland in the way they've done in the last winters. So what will happen on a freezing day in January when there's no wind and the wind farms are producing less than 1% of their output? How would each of the candidates see their party taking action to ensure that we have continuity of supply?
So really, in essence, you're saying, what do we do when the lights go out?
No, before that.
What will we do when the lights go out? Donald Cameron, please. What will we do when the lights go out? or better, before the lights go out?
I don't think that was the right question, Dan.
Well, the Scottish Conservatives believe that energy policy is dependent on three things. Security of supply is the most important thing. We need the lights to stay on. It's not a question of what we do. The lights go out, they've got to stay on. It needs to be affordable, and we obviously need to move to sort of decarbonisation. We as a party believe in a mixed energy policy. We don't think that one particular type of energy should take precedence over the other. And whilst there's a place for renewable energy, it should be part of a mixed picture. And if that can be achieved, then I think we can keep the lights on, and we can at the same time reduce carbon emissions, etc.
Alan Reid.
Yes, well, obviously keeping the lights on is one of the most important things for governments to do, and that's the right question, is what you're going to do to keep the lights on, not what you do after they go off. But we also have to move away from burning carbon. Our planets cannot survive if we keep on burning carbon, so we have to move to renewables. Scotland is a country that's very rich in renewables. It has tremendous potential, but not just in wind, but also wave, tidal, biomass, all sorts of different ways of regenerating energy by renewables. So I would like to see Scotland move to 100% generation by renewables.
Thank you. Mick, sorry.
Yeah, I'm actually not in favour of increasing the number of wind farms in Scotland. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, I don't think they look nice either. And I don't think they work in terms of when it's windy, they provide electricity, but maybe other times when it's not windy, when we need electricity, they don't. So you have to have a backup, a base load from somewhere else. I am in favour of using other forms of energy, such as, sea turbines. I'm in favour also of developing renewable energy arrangements. I'm actually quite lucky because my little business that we have does have renewable heat incentive because we put in a biomass boiler to it. But the truth of the matter is that people are paying a carbon tax as part of their bills, and you have to find quite a large amount of money as capital to put in that sort of plant. And of course, poor people who are paying their bills can't or don't have a place that is big enough to benefit from that. So I'm in favour of trying to develop district schemes using biomass, wood pellets or wood logs or whatever, and trying to get both communities and other groups looking at how they can produce innovative ways at a local level to provide district heating arrangements where you can put in, biomass type boilers which serve a range of different properties within a community. And I think that's the way forward, and we need to really encourage the use of renewables on a wider and on a community basis.
Mike Russell, please.
I mean, your question is a very important one in terms of what happens in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and that's the real issue. And the combination of energy policy being run from south of the border, but also essentially a different energy policy being pursued here, and dependence, and there's an irony in this, the dependence in Scotland on nuclear generation, although the present government wants to phase out, and I think rightly phase out nuclear generation, does create a problem, particularly if as it looks, the situation south of the border is worsening all the time. I'm not an expert on this, but it seems to me that we have a considerable juggling problem to do over a period of time. It is possible that within 15, 20, 25 years we will have sufficient generation from a variety of renewables, some of which we have now. Pumped storage is a type of renewable, and we've got one of the largest ones in Argyll and Bute. We may have tidal and wave, tidal more likely than wave, I think, at the present moment, that's generating significant amounts for us. Obviously, clearly, wind works in certain circumstances, solar works in certain circumstances. We have the nuclear power plants, whose life is being renewed. But I think your question is sometimes, to be blunt, a hard one to answer. If the situation south of the border were to deteriorate very substantially and very quickly, and you're anticipating that that might happen, then I think that we would have a problem. If that situation does not deteriorate and is maintained, the price of gas, for example, seems to be falling, and that actually would be advantageous in terms of the use of imported gas, then I think that we will, over a period of time, move from where we are now to a much securer supply, which will be, from the supply that we can provide. One of the most exciting things I've seen in a long time was I saw a small startup company that had developed a smart grid in which they were able to draw in small amounts from generation and use that to augment supply. And I know there's a lot of work being done on how that may happen. But I think you're raising a problem which whatever Scottish Government is going to have to continue to worry about and keep under review year on year, particularly if there are very bad winters caused by the cold water that's now sitting in the Atlantic, diverting the Gulf Stream, then that is a problem we will have to address.
We're recording this, Alistair, if you don't mind waiting for the microphone.
I was just going to say we might solve two problems with one thing here. The only place on Bute that can take tidal energy is the Kyles. If we build a bridge with a tidal lorry underneath it, maybe we solve two problems. And if it's community owned, that's all there.
Three problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
One is being talked about for Lismore. There's a lot of work going on about a bridge to Lismore that would have turbines.
Alistair McFarlane.
Sorry, Ling, not Lismore. Ling.
The panel excluded when they gave all their answers. They never, not one of them mentioned hydropower.
Yeah.
Scotland.
Yeah, hydropower. Yeah, absolutely.
Got oceans of water. No, you wave power. You mentioned no.
No, I mentioned pumped storage. I mentioned pumped storage and hydropower.
Yes,
so I did.
I think it should be a thing that's more looked into because I agree, when the Tunnel hydro station was built, and it's still working away today, and nobody's complaining about how dirty energy, how it pollutes the atmosphere. Clean energy, efficient energy, and I think that's the way we should be going forward.
Thank you.
I agree with that. And the hydropower in the West Highlands is revolutionised. I mean, the amount of small-scale micro-hydro schemes
it's developing
is massive, and it's a real. And as you say, in contrast to wind, it's not obtrusive, doesn't look ugly. It's very green, it's clean, it's a proven technology. As you say, it's been with us for over 50 years. So I'm a great fan of hydropower, and I think it's it's a really important renewable energy for us.
Thank you. Is it in connection with power generation?
Your question entirely.
Oh, well, I'll be with you just in a minute. Any other comments from the audience about power generation? Okay. Sorry, is this about power generation?
If we have more water power energy, couldn't we keep it to ourselves and not sell it off?
I don't know if they'll be prepared to answer that.
Well, if we've got a surplus, why not make the money by selling it?
Yeah, if you've got a surplus,
Yeah,
indeed.
but not the water.
The power.
Sorry, what do you want them to sell, the power or the water?
Well, I didn't think he was about to run
I don't
out.
want
was
them
it?
to sell the companies that provide the power
It's the companies.
to be sold off. I want them to be
Public assets. Well, I mean, it does seem to me that there has been too much privatisation in the past. I certainly also think that there is an increasing role for communities with regard to some of these initiatives, and I do know that in some places communities do get an amount of money paid back to them as a community enhancement from some of the hydroelectric schemes. I think there's one up at Cairndow. In terms of farming, for example, the farm next door to where I live at Blairmore Farm, I think he gets about £100,000 a year feedback because he's got a big header pond up on the top of the hill and he's put in a mini hydroelectric scheme. So, you know, those things can be done and people are getting paid quite a lot back. But I think it would be better if it was used for the benefit of the community and that we got some community backing. And maybe some of the stuff about community empowerment ought to relate to a wider range of assets. Maybe it would be a good thing for some of the ferries as well if we had communities controlling the ferries and the harbours, but there we are.
Mr. Sharp, what do you think about what you've heard?
I think the theory sounds great. I'm not convinced that we've got a grip of the practice. And I suspect if the wind doesn't blow one of these Januaries soon, there will actually be a problem. And I don't think anybody's actually got an answer to it. I mean, Mike Russell acknowledged that there was a balance between what happens in Scotland and England, but we are actually dependent on England keeping us going. You know, in these circumstances, that's life.
Thank you. Any other comments about power generation? Okay, we'll move on to the next question from Mr. McIntyre.
Thanks, Chairman. It's a farming question. I know there's only 3 farmers in the room tonight, but what does the panel consider is the future for dairy farming in Argyll and Bute?
Donald Cameron, please.
Well, I'm fully aware of the issues that dairy farmers face in particular, and I just hope that we can continue it as an industry. And I come from a farming background, not dairy farming, we have faced in this part of the world a long-term decline in livestock over the last 30, 40 years. And farming is a difficult profession. So I think we're very, I really hope we can keep dairy farming going. And I can't really add much more. I don't know enough about the specifics of it, but I'm just entirely sympathetic with the plight that dairy farmers find themselves in. And if anything can be done, as your MSP, I would try and assist you.
Mick Rice, what would you do for the dairy farmers?
Well, at one stage I thought they should set up a cooperative, but I'm told that First Milk is a cooperative and they can't actually sell it on at a price which makes a profit for the cooperative and for the farmers. Clearly, from what has been said earlier on at this meeting, there is a belief locally that having a bridge would make a difference to being able to sell on milk products from Bute, and therefore that would be an additional reason to give that notion much greater consideration. But I, to be honest, don't have an answer. I don't know what you can do with dairy farms if you can't get the price when you go to market. And of course, partly that is because the supermarkets are controlling the price and they're not easy people to deal with. So I think there is a major issue and a major problem, and I don't know what the answer is, to be honest.
Surely as an MSP, you would be looking for an answer to this problem.
Well, I'd be working with dairy farmers, yes, to see what can be done.
The economy of this island is so dependent on the agricultural sector. I don't think it's good enough just to say that you don't know what the answer is. I mean,
but it's honest.
They're looking for answers.
I hear what you're saying, but I think that, you know, politicians don't have magic wands and can just wave it and say that's the answer. I wish I could. Shazam! There's the answer for you. That's the problem. Clearly, if there was an easy answer, people would have come up with it before now. But having said that, it does seem to me that we'd need to sit down with dairy farmers to see what can be done to increase their rate of return. And at the end of the day, it may well be that some form of public subsidy is required, but even with a public subsidy, it should only be for an interim period in order for the industry to emerge at the end of that as a viable entity. You know, that's what needs to be done. It may well be, having said that the common agricultural policy does need to be looked at, because as far as I'm aware, there are a number of French agricultural outlets that have been going for the last 60 years on the basis of CAP payments when they wouldn't be viable. So maybe there are special cases that we need to argue much more effectively in that regard. So those are sorts of issues that need to be examined and looked at. But I'm not a farmer, I don't have detailed knowledge of it. I'm being honest with you. I'd want to meet with farmers to discuss it further to see what could be done. I don't have the answers. I would like to hear other members of the panel, because if they did have the answers, I would support them too.
Alan Reid, please.
Well, one thing that I would like looked at is the supermarket code of conduct. Now, that's the responsibility of the UK government, so it's not something that we can give a promise on as members of the Scottish Parliament if we were elected. But I would want to pursue this, because what I see is wrong with the supermarket code of conduct is it only applies to companies that sell directly to the supermarkets. So because the dairy farmers sell to processors who then sell to the supermarkets, the code of conduct doesn't apply to the farmers. They don't benefit from that. So I would certainly, that's one thing I would want to undertake on your behalf, would be to lobby the UK government to extend the code of conduct, the supermarket code of conduct, so it applies to everybody in the supply chain. Because I think it's the market not working properly that is the problem here. I mean, the word globalisation gets passed around glibly, but dairy farmers are definitely victims of globalisation, in that we now have a world milk market, and our traditional Scottish dairy farm has been on a relatively small scale, and it's obviously, and also because it's unlike other forms of farming, it employs more people. That means that it finds it difficult to compete with the cheap labour in other countries and the massive farms in other countries. But the thing I would want to look at would be that supermarket code of conduct to make it fairer to the farmer.
Two farmers over here, have you got any ideas about what the MSP should be doing about the dairy industry?
That's quite simple. It's supply and demand. There's too much supply. That's a worldwide problem, it's supply and demand.
So we can't solve the problem in Bute?
Can't solve the problem anywhere until there's casualties.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the casualties
The casualties are sitting, we're some of them, because that's the reality.
Because we, as you say, rely on an island, we're out with what they call the milk field, and you're stuck here, and with no other alternative, and that's it, we're stuck here.
So
as Duncan said earlier on, with a bridge, we had a contract with Graham's and Stirling, but because they couldn't rely on making milk, supermarkets and processors make a deal with us that we must deliver within 24 hours. Because we were on an island, couldn't guarantee it, they didn't want to know us. That was a contract that we always signed and sealed, that would have been our saviour today, but that's because we couldn't guarantee the ferries to run every day, they didn't want to know us.
Okay, Mike Russell.
Well, I mean, Robert, you all know better than I do. You've got two problems. One is the world price of milk, which is oversupply worldwide, and a variety of things like the Russians refusing to take certain things because of tit-for-tat sanctions. strange things happening in China, fall in demand in China, you've got those problems, and you've got the problem of First Milk. You know, you have a monopoly, essentially, as you've said, nobody else. This is a historic situation. First Milk is here, you are members of a cooperative which has been appallingly managed over a period of time and still remains very problematic for people. And the answer, I mean, your direct question, Robert, what is the future? The future is grim. I mean, the small things that we have been able to do, you know, I was very active in trying to help the subsidy for transportation. You know, I've spoken to the European Commission about the intervention price, which might have helped in some way, but the European Commission do not wish to intervene, so the intervention price has never been triggered. I think in Argyll and Bute more widely, I think in Kintyre, if the creamery were to operate in a different way, if the supermarkets were to be persuaded to pay some of the premium for cheese that they're paying for milk, then there is a possibility, it's an if, but you know, those discussions have been ongoing. There's a feasibility study going on at the moment about this, funded by, amongst others, HIE and Argyll and Bute Council. But you are also, and you don't need me to tell you this, also in a very difficult position where the price you will get for cows is, you know, rock bottom and certainly not going to make coming out of the business easy for anybody or going into anything else. The only small little ray of light I've seen in recent months in this has been on gear, where there is some indication that diversification onto on-farm product, ice cream for example, one person is moving into, may make that farm much more viable in the longer term, because if you produce raw materials, if you add value to them where they are, as opposed to exporting them to somewhere else, you can make more money. But not everybody's, I mean, if everybody was making ice cream, there'd be a glut of ice cream in the market. You know, cheese is a possibility for artisan cheeses, but you know, it's grim. And after 2 years of it, people are losing substantial amounts of money, frankly, so that First Milk can start to make a profit. And that's the immoral nature of it. I mean, I use that word advisedly. I do think any company, any cooperative that is in actual fact making a profit on the basis that its suppliers are losing money every single day is not a viable business in my view. And I've had that fight with Mike Gallagher, the chief executive, and I'll go on having it because I think that is an immoral thing to do, and I've told him that to his face. And I think some of the other things that are happening, such as with stuff with retained capital now, is wrong and needs to be opposed.
What do you think of what you've heard?
All four are very honest, James.
Sorry?
All four are very honest. They seem to have a grasp of what's going on anyway. And as my two dairy farming colleague said over there, oversupply, a company that's not functioning properly over the last 2 or 3 years has contributed to the problem. But the inescapable fact is that the 13 left in Bute and the 32 in Kintyre.
Looking at the crumbling schools in Edinburgh, is this the chickens coming home as regards PPI and PPP? And at the end of the 25-year contracts, are we going to be left with schools that are not fit for purpose?
Schools are not fit for purpose. That's what you're saying. Donald Cameron, please.
The honest answer is I don't know what the final issue will be. I mean, the most important thing is that they are safe for our children, and we have to make them safe and take time to do that. And however that happens, it has to happen quickly. I don't think much is to be gained from playing the blame game as to who's to blame for the PFI in the past. The point is that we need safe schools and we need safe infrastructure, and we probably need to spend some money on achieving that.
Alan Reid.
Well, the most important thing is safety. It's important that any school where there's a remote possibility of a problem is inspected and made sure to be safe. I mean, under the PFI, the contractor is responsible for maintaining it for 30 years. So I certainly would expect Edinburgh City Council to pursue the contractor and get full compensation from them. Except for the PFI model, which was tried for a few years, has now been shown to be extremely expensive. It was the Blair government that forced that on both the Scottish Executive, as it was called then, and local councils. I certainly wouldn't have anything to do with that model again.
Mike?
Sorry.
Mike,
Yes,
not
I beg your
Mick.
pardon.
I was in the Scottish Parliament when those deals were signed. I was part of a party that strongly opposed the PFI project at the time on the grounds that it was fattening private companies and in actual fact not building schools for value for money. We now also know they were shoddily built schools. In fact, they were dangerously built schools. So, of course, these schools were not fit for purpose. Of course, they have to be made safe, but we have to, and I've backed publicly this week an inquiry into why this happened, and to expose the fact that companies built schools essentially on the cheap in a way that is completely unacceptable, and those chickens have come home to roost. It could have been even worse, given the damage that's been done to them. Tonight, we learn that there are 2 schools in Argyll and Bute which are requiring some additional work done to them. Again, built by the same consortium, slightly later. One of them is here. And the roof here of the joint campus is having to have work done to it. Now, it's not a safety issue, but they have discovered that there aren't enough ties in the roof here. And the same is true, apparently, at the Oban Primary campus. Now, both of those buildings are being repaired. This one will be ready, apparently, for the start of the new term, and the other Oban one is no safety to pupils. But it does say something about the view, the Labour view, the Tory view, that you can get something for nothing. Because in the end, you can't get something for nothing.
Mick Rice.
Yeah, I mean, clearly putting ties into building a wall is a standard practice for a bricklayer. So the fact that it wasn't done shows that a cheapskate approach was taken, which has now led to this crisis where the walls are no longer safe and they need to be checked out. But there is a wider issue really in relationship to council funding. As I understand it, 44% of all council tax income goes to pay debt. So the PFI schemes actually have added to that, and not only does it pay debt, but would you believe it, they're getting 6% on what was loaned. Now, the bank base rate has been around 1% since 2008. So they've been doing terribly well, have they not? Those institutions that loan money to councils so that they could pay for these shoddy PFI schemes. And it seems to me, therefore, that we ought to be looking for some moratorium and actually say to those that loaned money to councils, we're no longer going to pay 6%. We're going to actually reduce it to a more realistic level, which would then mean we'd have more money to make sure we were building things safely in the first place.
Thank you.
Could I just say, it looks to me, and probably to other people as well, that the PPP or the PFI, the P was profit before pupils. So I think we will have to do something about it, and the blame game needs to be played. I disagree entirely. This has got to be sorted out, and money has to change hands again.
Anyone else got a comment about the schools?
Well, I keep hearing
The microphone will come to you.
I keep hearing from the Conservative candidate that we need to spend more money. And it's quite surprising that at the same time the Conservatives are cutting taxes for pretty much everyone, we should be spending more money. How does that work?
Would you like to reply?
Well, we're not cutting taxes for pretty much everyone.
Really?
No, just the
No, we're not cutting taxes for pretty much everyone. We're saying we should keep tax rates in line with the rest of the UK. And that means, and if we don't, we will not be competitive. If you hang up a sign at the border saying higher taxes here, people won't come, people won't want to work here.
Well, I'm sure we're all very grateful that personal tax allowances have increased and therefore everyone has benefited from a tax cut. The higher earners also benefiting from tax cuts, very substantial tax cuts. How do we pay for them?
Yeah, exactly. There's no pain, that's why, isn't it?
Is it on this? The schools?
Yeah. I mean, setting aside the question of PFI, right or wrong, which I don't want to get into at the moment, the basic issue is an engineering one. Somebody specified these schools. Somebody built them to specifications. So apart from the politics of PFI, right or wrong, the question actually ought to be is why were they specified the way they were, and why were the quality assurance standards and the building of them not properly applied?
You want to answer that?
Well, it's an important question, but of course we need an inquiry to know if what you have said is true, whether they were inspected at the time, what the specification actually was. Well, you would assume that that was the case, but you'd also assume you wouldn't build schools that will fall down. You know, so there's a couple of assumptions here. We need those facts. We need to find that out. And you know, how we find that out, either by a public inquiry or whether we have a parliamentary inquiry, there will have to be an inquiry of what went wrong and why it went wrong. But I don't think you can divorce the politics of this, because it was the politics of something for nothing, and you don't get something for nothing.
I'm an engineer by profession, and I think we've got to start from the engineering
I agree.
politics when you're
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring it back to the PFI. PFI doesn't just only happen with the schools, it happened with the waste management, and that chicken is coming home to roost in Argyll and Bute, with the Shanks PFI, which is costing a fortune and will continue to cost a fortune for the next 10 years. And not just that, it's stifling innovation in this area, looking towards a circular economy, a more green economy. That PFI isn't just costing us a fortune, it's stopping us from innovating and changing how we manage.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to come back on this, Donny? Well, you asked the question. Sorry.
I don't have to much of the answer though. No, what I see is that at the end of whatever the contract is, 30 years or 25 years, we're going to be left with schools that are no longer fit for purpose, and the whole thing will start over again. That the schools are going to have to be replaced after only 25 years. I mean, the academy's still standing there, and you and I went to that school, Dan. And I mean, it's not functioning, but at least it's standing and nothing's falling off it. So it's to do with the fact that modern buildings, and I think Colin's dead right, it is an engineering problem. But where were the engineers when the schools were going up?
Where's what?
Where were the engineers that should have been checking in the quality of the work? I mean,
well, I think that's the big question. What was the Master of Works or the Clerk of Works doing? I mean, we could get into a tremendous argument for and against PFI, but I think the problem here, my reading of it is, as was suggested, it was a lack of inspection. And why were these schools given certificates of, I can't remember the technical term, completion? Why did that happen?
I agree with you, Dan, and I also agree with Colin Sharp. I think the basic line is there is no such thing now as a clerk of works. I think that's it in a nutshell. I have been in the academy here, the new academy, some stormy winter nights, and I can hear the roof shaking. And I think I'm correct in saying that the roof in Lochgilphead High School came off just after it was built. Am I right in saying that?
I think one of our girls' schools lost a roof.
The gym hall. Gym hall.
Was it Lochgilphead or somewhere else?
It was the gym hall in Lochgilphead.
Yeah.
The roof shifted.
So again, at the chance of maybe getting lynched, I don't think PFI is the problem here. It might well be the overall problem, but the problem, I think, as I see it, is that the lack of a Clerk of Works or a Master of Works. Can we move on?
The company that built these schools in Edinburgh is out of business, so how do they bring them to?
Well, exactly.
With great difficulty, I would think. Could we move on? Any more questions?
Topic of schools. Sorry. In Oban, they're building a brand new school, one that's replacing one that was only built 20 years ago. One that I went to, one that was adequately built, didn't generally fall down. Why is the SNP spending money on new schools, demolishing old schools?
SNP?
Well, two reasons. One is that there is money available for schools, but can I finish? Local authorities have to ask where they're going to spend it, right? And they wanted to replace that school. And they wanted to replace that school because they thought because of the proliferation of buildings that it wasn't fit for purpose. And that was a local authority decision. Now, the government is often accused of not allowing local authorities to do things, but when local authorities bid for that and are entitled to an allocation, they can say where they want to do so. It was a less problematic decision because the local authority was clear about it than the Dunoon decision for the primary schools, which took forever because they couldn't make their minds up which they wanted to do, whether they wanted to replace one school or all of the schools or put them together. But the short answer is local authorities, and I was the minister at the time, so I was familiar with what happened. Local authorities were entitled to say which schools they wished to be replaced. And we weren't actually in a position to say, no, you're not getting that one, what about that one? Some local authorities had done all their schools by then. Orkney, for example, ceased to draw on the allocation because they had done all their schools. Argyll believed that Oban was the secondary school they had that required the most done. They had just had Campbellton agreed, so there was no further major project to be done, and they asked for that because they regarded the school as not fit for purpose.
Again, if the panellists want to say anything else?
No, neither in the SNP nor on the council, so I don't think I'm in a position to answer the question. Whether Isabel or Robert have anything to add on from the council, I don't know.
I'm not in the administration, I'm in the opposition.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to say, Mick?
Well, I mean, I am aware, I'm fairly sure that I heard about some major scandal in Edinburgh Council in the planning department some years ago, where there was an issue about some of the officers authorising contractors, and I believe that that was the case around about the time when some of this work was being conducted. Now, having said that, obviously there needs to be an investigation into what has gone on to get to the bottom of it. But I am also concerned that, even in relationship to our own council, I am aware from local builders that I talk to that very often the building warrant officers who are supposed to sign off the building tell them to take a photograph on their phone to email it to them so that they can look at the photograph to complete the building warrant certificate. That's what I am told by builders. Robert, I can introduce you to the builders who told me that if you want. And the point I was going to make, which you might agree with me on, Robert, is it does seem to me that in Argyll and Bute, we do need to have a progressive alliance running the council, and maybe that's something we could jointly agree on for next year. Well, at the moment, there's elections next year.
This is the Holyrood election campaign. It's not to do with Argyll and Bute Council. Any other questions from the audience? Your microphone will come to you.
It's to do with the school. Unfortunately, I'm too old. I mean, the kids have left the school. But at the moment, a large number, now I'm not going to say the exact number, but a large number of teachers travel every day from Wemsby or wherever over to Rothesay. If the ferries are in alert or go off, teachers don't turn up. If, when the teachers are here, CalMac phone up the school and say the last ferry is going to be 1 o'clock and just down tools and beat it. Is that a healthy scenario? Should the teachers who are employed from the mainland, if the ferries are going to go off on a Monday morning, should they be made to be here on a Sunday night? And if the ferries are going to go off at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, should they be made to stay here overnight? Should that be a condition of their employment? And it's not just 1 or 2 teachers that are involved here, it's a heap of teachers that are involved. My own children's experiences after they left the school here and went to university, that every student in the university that they encountered had loads of after-school activities. Now there has been none here for years because the teachers beat it in the 4 o'clock boat. What do you think about that?
Well, I honestly don't know if MPs or MSPs rather could answer that question, because I think it's a condition of their employment. The condition of the employment, as I understand it just now, is that they have a right to stay, and it's part of the EEC rules.
I would like to hear their opinion.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to explain to you. Well, unfortunately, I'm chairing this. That's the city. It's a condition of employment, and they would probably have to go further than Holyrood to get this changed.
It should also be pointed out that if you were to change the conditions of employment, you wouldn't have any teachers at the school anyway, because you couldn't. You probably wouldn't attract any teachers to the island.
Okay, well, we'll go to the panel, but I think I'm just trying to explain to you why this happens. That the panel can give you what they would do if they're elected, but that's the reason for it. It's a condition of employment, and I think it's beyond the Parliament and Hall. I'll be corrected.
Well, the NHS then, I don't have to rethink the NHS, that someone was told you're employed here, you've got to be here.
Okay, we'll go to the panel. Mike.
I actually have a lot of sympathy for what you say, because it happens in Dunoon as well. So that's two substantial areas in the constituency where schools close or are very substantially reduced in staff because of that. I think it would be difficult to change, to be blunt with you, given terms and conditions, but I think it could be changed by example, because it's not just the schools. In the council, 3 of the 4 members of the senior management team are actually domiciled outside this area. And I think there's a big issue in there. I think if you're leading an organisation, then I think you have to be living in that organisation, and if you're paid a substantial salary, and these senior managers are, they should be spending that salary, frankly, in Argyll and Bute, and not all the time outside it. So I think if the council began to say, we would expect those who are in senior positions to do that, and it could enter into negotiation with the trade unions about terms and conditions of service for teachers, I think over a period of time you could tackle it. Because I agree, it is not a healthy thing to happen. And when you see schools closed in these circumstances, it is not good. So I think there's a way to go ahead, but let's start at the very top of Argyll and Bute Council. I'm also in favour of MSPs living within their constituency, and I'm glad to say I've done so. I've lived in Argyll and Bute for 25 years, and I'm no moving.
Well, Mick, you're a trade union.
I am indeed a trade unionist, and therefore I wouldn't want to affect the terms and conditions unless there had been proper negotiations. So I was pleased to hear that being mentioned. But I do think that there is a serious problem, and it may well be that in order to resolve it, there's going to have to be some way to enhance the attractiveness on living on this island for teachers. And it may be that you're talking about some enhanced relocation arrangements or whatever. I also think that there is a general point, which is that if you're working for a big organisation, you should be expected, particularly if it's a council or a public body, to live within that area. And I'm very glad, of course, that our MSP lives within Argyll and Bute, but I think in the past you were an MSP for an area outside of Argyll and Bute, so it didn't stop you then. No doubt you felt relieved when you came home, so to speak.
Happy,
but
and
there
even
we
more
are.
effective. I'm
Yes.
So.
Alan Reid.
Yes, it's a serious problem, and we have to find a way of solving it. I think tend to approach it though using the carrot rather than the stick, because I think I'm sure the concerns of the gentleman that spoke, that if he just used the stick and said you have to live here, you have to turn up every day, we're not going to allow you to not be here because of weather conditions, then I suspect that actually trying to attract teachers might be very difficult unless we were to write something into their terms and conditions to attract teachers. So I think that the way to approach the problem is for the MSP to discuss with the council, to discuss with the teachers' unions, and try to come up with an agreement that would attract teachers to live here all the time. I think that carrot approach is the better way to go about it. But the other thing I would want to say is that we should also be trying to tackle the ferries problem, and I certainly would be wanting to, as I said earlier, talk to Transport Scotland, just why do we have this problem here and can we fix that?
Thank you. Donald Cameron.
Yeah, I think we can all agree it's a very unhealthy situation. Speaking with my lawyer's hat on, in an ordinary contract of employment, you can write in that the place of work is to be X, just as you can write in a mobility clause which says you are expected to move around from A to B. Unfortunately, the contracts of employment of teachers are a different kettle of fish, and they involve very complex negotiations with unions, the council, etc. But I don't see why something could be achieved in that regard, and something we can hit the problem is that we return again to the issue of transport links, and that's the fundamental issue. Yet again, it's a question of infrastructure, reliability of the ferries, etc. And we need to. We see that's what we need to solve.
Would you like to come back?
2 seconds, yeah. There's two of you who have hit the nail on the head there. I mean, this used to be known as a commuter island. There used to be loads of people commuting to their work. And I feel that the reason we can't attract teachers here is that either partner, who maybe can't find a job here, could in the past travel to Glasgow or Greenock or Port Glasgow or whatever to find a place of work to do whatever he or she did. And that's one of the reasons why, or one of the main reasons why we can't get the teachers to live here. And other professions.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience?
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
As a teacher, we have a reciprocal arrangement. If you cannot get to your school, you are supposed to report in to the nearest school. Now, what we don't have is an arrangement across authorities. And that would go part of the way to solve the problem here. If the teachers who live on this island couldn't get to their schools on the mainland, they came to the schools here, and vice versa. We don't have that arrangement in place. Now, as head teachers, we have asked the authority to negotiate that, and they have refused.
Is there a big problem going the other way? I don't know. Teachers that live here and work on the mainland, is that a significant problem?
They're not going to tell you. Get a day off.
If they know in advance, certainly I know one who goes regularly. She works at Inverkip, and when the boats are going to be off, she goes over the day before and stays with a family member who lives in the Glasgow area and then travels to Inverkip. Now I know one person, there must be others as well.
Yeah. But I think the problem must be obviously coming the other way, I would imagine.
Probably less so in Cowell, because in Cowell there are a lot of teachers who go on the boat the other way.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's 9 o'clock, 2 hours almost of toing and froing. If there's any question that's really hurting someone,
What can we do to end the tyranny of our Garment Council? What can candidates do to end the tyranny of our Garland Bute Council?
well, I'm not sure to ask who to ask first here.
We've got elections next year. The ballot box.
Yeah. Right, Mike, we'll just go along the table.
Elections undoubtedly change the present administration, which is independents, Tories and Liberals. But the second thing is make smaller councils. I mean, Kilmorey doesn't work. It's a long way away. And we need smaller councils with more local power. And I have been arguing for that for some time and will continue to do so. But the most immediate thing is change the administration at the ballot box next year. Please.
Alan Reid.
It's in your hands. It's yourselves that elect councillors. I don't like governments dictating to councils. I believe in devolving power down to a local level. And I think there's just been too much in Britain and in Scotland in recent years of governments dictating to councils. If you don't like the way the council is being run at the moment, then it's a case of voting new councillors. I think that's the way to approach. I mean, as your MSP, I would certainly, if you were unhappy with the council, with anything, I would certainly take up the case, your case with them and try to persuade the council to do things differently. But ultimately, the council is a democratically elected body, and it's up to yourselves to vote in new councillors. I know that there's often not much of a choice on the ballot box, but I think that's up to the community to... Well, there often isn't. I mean, there often isn't much of a choice at the ballot box. I mean, the number of The number of places that are up for election, often the number of candidates is only very slightly greater than the number of places. I would like to see more people offer themselves for election. And I think it's a case of the community, if you're dissatisfied with the council at present, is get together and agree a candidate and campaign for that candidate. I think that's the way to change things.
Mick Rice, please.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a progressive alliance of people who are prepared to work together before the election takes place. Because what tends to happen at the moment, there is horse trading after the event to see who's going to form the new administration. My view is that the current administration of Argyll and Bute Council has got to go. I think we need to target who they are, and we need to get an alliance across the progressive parties and some progressive independents to see who we can get rid of, basically, in order to improve the quality of the council leadership. That's what we have to do, and we have to think about that now. And it means, of course, that when it comes to council elections, no party can expect to win all of the seats, even in one particular ward. And therefore, it would probably better, and I would say this as a Labour candidate, if I was a candidate in the council elections, I would say to my supporters, if you vote for me as number one preference, you better vote for the SNP candidate as number two. And possibly, depending on who they are, the Lib Dem as number 3. So, because you can't get them all in, can you? So you've got to try and work across parties before the election in order to make sure that the Tories and, in my view, other evil types are done down. There you go.
Ladies,
you heard it here first.
Yeah. On that note, we've had now 2 hours of questions and answers, and I've said this before when chairing these Hustings meetings, it never fails to amaze me that when the candidates have no idea really what's going to be asked, that they come up with not always solutions, but certainly answers. You could probably have a guess in this island, it would be CalMac and the NHS and farming. All these things have been well aired tonight, and I would like you to show your appreciation to the candidates.
Thank you.